Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the making of the road between COP27 and the CBD COP15 that will be taking place in Montreal in December. Today's event is sponsored by WF Canada and our colleagues at WF International Climate and Energy Practice. We're delighted to have with us today the Honorable Stephen Guilbeault, Minister of Environment and Climate Change Canada, who will co-host the CBD COP15 in collaboration with China, which holds the presidency. And we have the head of WF's Climate and Energy Practice, Manuel Pulgar Vidal, who also is chair of IUCN Climate Crisis Commission. Both leaders have a long history on the front lines of fighting climate change. Prior to entering political life, Minister Guilbeault was a well-known and effective climate campaigner, nationally and internationally at Greenpeace, and is a co-founder of Equiterre in Canada, among many other roles. Manuel, as Minister of Environment for Peru, served as the president of COP20, paving the way for the success of the Paris COP the following year. For many years, the UNFCCC and CBD secretariats and COPs proceeded separately. With the acceleration of climate change and of biodiversity loss, the many feedback loops between these two challenges become undeniable. As the IPCC-based WF report released this week pointed out, we can't pretend that nature can do everything to stop climate change, but the evidence shows that nature can do a lot. And now, please welcome Manuel, who will lead the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this opportunity. And first, let me welcome the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change of Canada, Stephen Guilbeault. I hope that I am pronouncing well. And I would like to make this conversation a more informal, so I will call you Stephen, if you allow me. Thank you. Great. And let's try to have a chat, an informal chat. So, how important, Stephen, do you think it is to get a strong GBF in Montreal in December of the current year? Why do we need to have a strong global biodiversity framework?
Well, first, thank you very much for having me here. And thank you for all the work you've done all these years. Why is it important? Well, it's important for a number of different reasons. I mean, I think we can really be thankful to the COP26 UK presidency for having been able to help us break the silos between climate, biodiversity, and oceans. And I don't think I've seen before a climate COP where there's so much discussion about biodiversity and COP15 and the next COP. And I think we are starting to do a better job at integrating these issues, whereas in the past, we've tended to treat them in silos. We need a good agreement, obviously, because we need to do so much more in terms of nature protection all around the world and restoration. We need a good agreement in Montreal, and not just an agreement in Montreal, because we're already 2 years into the post-2020 years. So we're already late, and obviously there are very good reasons why the second part of COP15 could not be held in 2020 and in 2021. But we're already 2 years into the decade where we should be already in implementation mode. And so we need collectively to come to Montreal with ambition, to ensure that we have a strong and robust agreement so that we can accelerate nature protection all around the world.
Yeah. And it is true. We do need that a strong decision urgently by COP15 in Montreal, because that could bring us a clear vision on what to do and how to do. But sometimes the vision, it is not enough.
Yes, sure.
No, if they are not joined by some other element. I am used to thinking, probably until now we have failed in connecting nature with the economy. So how much economic loss we could have by continue losing nature. That is something that we have to continue developing. Or probably because we have not been able to convene, as here in COP27, the non-party stakeholders or the non-state actors. Or probably because we haven't defined well mechanism to unlock the mobilization of resources. So we can get probably a good GBF, but in your point of view, Stephen, what are those collateral elements that we should include to strengthen the convention, the GBF, and the implementation of the GBF?
So I think that you're right. We haven't been collectively doing a very good job at connecting the issue of nature and the economy in a cohesive and coherent manner so that government, businesses, and our public in our different countries understand those linkages. That being said, I think that we are, in many of our countries, seeing a very high level of support for nature conservation. And sometimes even more so, for example, than climate change, because climate can be complicated, certainly when it comes to the implementation of various solutions. You know, what do we do in the energy sector, in the industrial sector, in transportation? Protecting nature is easier for people to understand. And I think what we're seeing happening around COP15 is a number of different stakeholders and governments coalescing together. An environmental organization like yours, philanthropies, the private sector. I've met Canadian companies who've come to COP27 to look at things they can do on nature protection. And they will be in Montreal as well, large mining companies. So I think that people are starting to see not only the linkages, but also the role they have to play. It's about government, obviously, and we need, as government, to have strong international agreements. We need to have strong domestic policies on these things. And certainly in Canada, we've been working really, really hard with the help of people like Harvey to guide us into doing better when it comes to our domestic agenda, making sure that anything we do on conservation in Canada is done in collaboration with Indigenous people at the table from the get-go. And I'm not saying we've always done that. We haven't. But I think we are really changing the way we do things. And I think these elements give me a lot of hope that we will be able to have a strong leadership by all these groups coming into Montreal to ensure that we come out with a strong agreement.
And you have just mentioned some sectors for the climate arena. It is clear science has suggested us that we have to walk the transition of the energy, the industry, cities and infrastructure, and land use and deforestation. Seems clear, everybody knows what are those key for transition. But it is a bit more difficult with nature. How to organize sectors, how should we define those kind of transitions by drivers, by economic sectors that are depending too much of natural resources? How can we do that? Because it is a bit difficult.
It is, and I think as much as we need a just transition on climate change and helping workers and communities transit away from fossil fuels, we need a just transitions for those sectors that are overusing nature and forestry. In Canada, one of the tools we want to use to ensure that we reach our goal of protecting 25% of our lands and oceans by 2025 and 30% by 2030 is, there's a number of different things we're doing, but one of them is the signature of nature agreement with our provinces and territories. And through those, and the federal government is putting at the disposal of our provinces and territories billions of dollars to do that. In some provinces, clearly it's going to be working with them on how we help them transition their forestry sector, how we protect old growth forests, how do we ensure that certain species at risk are protected through those agreements. Spotted owl, caribou, obviously in Canada is a very iconic species. So I think the concept of just transition is an important one in the climate discussion. It's a very important one also in the nature discussion, and I don't think we're talking about it enough so that people can understand that, okay, well, we won't do as much logging as we used to, but there are other economic opportunities that we want to develop and we want to work on with you.
Yeah. And Steven, you also mentioned in some of your answers in this conversation the Biodiversity Day. Yesterday we celebrated here the Biodiversity Day. And it has been the first time ever that we organize a Biodiversity Day. What has made possible that? Because it's a strong, good political signal. It is just because we will have in 3 weeks the COP15, or do you think there are more strong elements that has made that possible?
I think that, I mean, clearly COP15 is mobilizing a lot of people, but I don't think it's just about COP15. I think it is about the fundamental realization of the fact that we can't talk about climate without talking about nature. We can't talk about nature without talking about climate, and we can't talk about these two without talking about oceans. And obviously, you know, it is a bit complicated in the UN system, or even at the national level, where we tend to look at these issues individually. But I think collectively, we are doing a very good job at breaking those barriers. There's still some left, obviously, but I mean, we had a COP15 ministerial level meeting at COP27 to prepare for COP15. I think this just shows the level of commitment by a number. We had about 30 countries that were present there, by a number of countries to ensure that we are making those linkages.
Good, that is perfect. And before of this question, I asked Steven about this beautiful orange T-shirt. Do you know what does it symbol?
Canadians would probably know, yes.
Yeah.
But for those who are not Canadian, as you probably know, Canada has a very dark colonial history with Indigenous people. And this is a symbol. It's called the Orange Shirt Day in Canada. It's a grassroots movement that was launched by a woman who when she was sent to residential school, her grandma bought her an orange shirt to go to. Obviously, people didn't realize what the residential school system would mean for them. But so her grandma offered her the orange shirt, and the first thing that the nuns did when she arrived at the residential school is take away her orange shirt. So it became a symbol for the resistance of Indigenous people to colonialism in Canada. But also, I was a heritage minister before being environment minister, and one of the things I did is to pass law in the Canadian Parliament to create a National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, which is also called the Orange Shirt Day. So that we can remember the terrible things we did to Indigenous people in Canada, and that we can have difficult conversations at home, in schools, at the workplace on that day, on September 30th, so that we never forget and we never repeat what we did.
Yeah, and you know, Steven, that I brought the reference to the pink because probably in some way we do need to have like kind of truth and reconciliation approach with nature in some way, because we are not fully aware on how much damage we have and pain to nature we have caused. And that probably could change our understanding on how much nature, it is our ally. No, because that's the point. We should make nature a big ally of our own development, of our health, of our future. That is the only way. Do you agree?
I absolutely agree with you. Yes, Manuel.
Yeah. Now let's go into more contentious topics. Because when we think about climate and nature, they are the easiest way to see it, because we know how much nature can contribute to address climate change. Yesterday, WWF released a report that it is called Nature, Our Secret Ally. No, because 54% of emissions has been captured because of nature in the last decade. It's amazing. So, and on the other hand, we know that by promoting good intervention on nature, we can also address societal challenges, and that will be my next question. But that balance in between emission reduction that we are seeking and pushing for, and removals, and how much we could use nature to address climate change, it is creating some controversies. No offsets, are saying some organizations. How can we get a good balance to use nature as an ally to continue addressing our climate objectives?
So, to me, we need every possible tool in the toolbox if we want to be able to tackle the dual crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. And what I mean by that is we have to do absolutely everything we can to reduce our emissions, to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, especially in a country like Canada, we're the fourth largest producer of oil and gas in the world. We have an extremely important responsibility to do that. And we are doing, I mean, this year alone, we've either adopted or are in the process of adopting 6 different pieces of regulations to reduce methane emissions, to put a cap on the emission of the oil and gas sector, to ensure that our electrical sector will be carbon neutral by 2035. We're doing all these things, but we know that it won't be enough, and we need nature to help us for the. Maybe if governments had listened to people like you and I 30 years ago, from a climate change perspective, we would not be in the mess we are today, but they didn't. I was at COP1, that was my first COP, and I was a young youth activist. I may have been outside the doors, the main doors of the meeting hall, doing a sitting, telling delegates they hadn't finished doing their job in 1995. They needed to do more. But people didn't listen to scientists and they didn't listen to us. And now we're in a position where trying to look only at the climate change side of the equation is not enough. And we know that nature is a powerful tool and often the most effective tool. In Canada, we've started investing in nature-based solutions, for example, building parks to help us with spring floodings in parts of the country. They're cheaper than trying to do it mechanically, about a fifth, a sixth of the cost. They're more efficient and they're way more beautiful because you can go and walk and spend time in there. I don't tend to go and spend a whole lot of time in plants constructed with concrete. Like you don't have that added nature benefit. And I think, and we're using dollars that before would have gone to roads or bridges. In Canada, we're saying the federal government will not pay for the expansion of the road system. That's over. We will obviously work with our provinces and territories to help them maintain the road system, but if you want to build new roads, no federal money for that.
Probably what I'm going to ask you, it is not politically correct. But I know that you climbed a tower in Toronto.
Yes.
How it was? It was to promote Kyoto?
So in 2001, I climbed what was at the time the tallest standing structure, so the tallest tower in the world. A colleague of mine from the UK and I climbed to, I think it was 370 meters. Wow. to deploy a banner putting pressure on Canada and the US to ratify the Kyoto Protocol.
Good. I love that. Thank you for being transparent in sharing your story.
I was arrested. It's funny, actually. Let's be more politically incorrect. So last year in Copenhagen, during the Leaders Summit, I was with Prime Minister Trudeau, and there was a small leaders event. There was about 40 leaders in the room. Prime Minister Modi, Angela Merkel, obviously Prime Minister Johnson, President Biden. Mia Mottley was sitting right beside us. And so we're sitting there. I'm the plus one of the Prime Minister. Very small room, like small, intimate meeting. President Biden does his intervention, and he gets up to leave. And the Prime Minister turns to me and he says, "Have you ever met President Biden?" Of course, I've never met the President of the United States. So he takes me and he grabs the President by the shoulders with his 16 bodyguards around, and he says, "Joe, come here. I want to introduce you to my new Environment and Climate Change Minister. He's a real activist. He's been arrested 4 times." So that's how I was introduced to the President of the United States for the first time.
Yeah, that's a great medals. Good to know. So let's move into NBS, nature-based solutions. So it has been fantastic, that political traction that we got in UNEA 5.2. It has been the first time ever that NBS has been recognized in a multilateral process. And how much do we need NBS as a mechanism, as a low-hanging fruit to start to integrate climate and nature, and also to address well the societal challenge of mitigation, adaptation, water security, food security, among some others? So how urgent it is to get NBS, get a good formal recognition of NBS in current COP27 cover decision?
Well, I was saying earlier that we need all the tool in the toolbox, and that's certainly one of the tools that we need. I've had the pleasure of having many conversations with Lee White from Gabon, and when you look at what Gabon is doing and how stringent and strong the work that they've done on offsets has been, and all of the work that they've been doing over the years on REDD Plus and making sure that they got the rules right, and through the UNFCCC process that it has gone through all of the steps. I think it can give you a lot of confidence that, you know, and it doesn't mean that everyone has to do it, but when it's done, it's going to be done properly, and it's going to be a net benefit, both from a nature point of view as well as a climate point of view.
And let me also go, because when we think about MBS, something that we have to secure it is high quality. Because it is true, sometimes, you know, that I heard in this COP, no, some people saying MBS, but we have already developed REDD, we have already developed, why one more tool, no? And many countries are worried of fragmenting the resources when we create more tools. But also, many organizations are worried about the high quality of the intervention. You know that your colleague, the former Canadian Minister of the Environment, Catherine McKenna, presented a good report on which objective it is mostly to see how can we recover credibility on the net zero objective. What do you think on those high quality, strong credibility approaches for this kind of instruments?
I think none of us have a lot of time or patience for greenwashing. We don't need that. It's unhelpful. The solutions that we are putting forward need to be real, genuine solutions that will help us achieve our environmental goals. And it's in everyone's best interest. I mean, if you're a company, why would you want to buy something or invest in something that is low quality, on which you will be criticized for? You want to go for the gold standard. You want to make sure that what you go for will be robust, will be defended by many, not just you. And the same is true of government. And obviously we want to do that, I mean, especially from a Canadian perspective. You know, we have signed UNDRIPT. We want to do that with our Indigenous partners at the table, respecting their traditional rights and their land rights. Because the reality is that in a country like Canada, as in many other countries, these projects will take place on Indigenous lands. So they need to be with us at the table when the rules are developed, so that they have a say, so that when these projects are developed, they will be there with us to do them.
I still have a couple of questions, and then I would like to open for one or two questions from the audience. But before of my two questions, could you secure us good weather in Montreal in December?
Working on it. As you know, the Environment Minister in Canada is responsible for the Canadian Weather Service, so I'm talking to them every day.
At least change the thermometer, do something. Okay, but
now, you know, in Montreal, if temperature is an issue, Montreal has a pretty interesting underground system. So you could be in Montreal for 2 weeks and not go outside if you want. You could go from your hotel to the subway, to the conference center, to restaurants. You could even go and see movies or to the theater, and you don't have to step foot outside.
Okay, thank you for that, for that advice. So, you know, Stephen, that I am championing the action agenda for the CBD, because we are convinced that by bringing non-party stakeholders into the table could contribute to achieve our objective, strengthening our outputs and implement, because it is mostly to implement. How effective do you think it could be to strengthen this idea of an action agenda in the CBD?
I think it's a very good idea. I think we need the involvement of all the actors. I mean, we've spoken about that earlier. We just announced in Canada $800,000 to help civil society organization, Indigenous organization, participate in the COP15 process. Obviously, we've worked with the Chinese presidency and the Secretariat to ensure that Indigenous-led conservation will be front and center at COP15, and we've worked with organizations like yours, philanthropies, and the private sector. We think we need all hands on deck. and we need to mobilize everyone, and that proposal is certainly a very good way to do that.
And let's imagine that we get a good GBF and a strengthened action agenda among some other good elements, outcomes in Montreal. After that, and to implement, how can we collaborate in between this climate community and the CBD community to promote convergence and to be more effective? So what do you suggest to promote that kind of, to strengthen the collaboration in between both conventions?
That's a very good point. I mean, it's one thing to have ambitious international goals. The next step is to make sure that they are implemented nationally. Obviously, resource mobilization for developing countries is key, and the 10-point plan that was developed by the Maldives, Gabon, Ecuador, and the UK is a very good step in that direction. But I mean, I'm confident, I'm optimistic that we will have a good agreement in Montreal, but then that agreement will need to be implemented. I think we need to ask ourselves the question, I mean, is it sufficient that the COP meets only once every 2 years? Do we need to have something happening every year on a more ongoing basis so that, you know, we don't wait so much to understand how things are going, how implementation is going, what is working well, what is not working well, so that countries can compare notes. What have you been doing? What have I been doing? And there's a lot of this happening here at the COP, and it happens every year. It's also a way for people to keep, as government, our feet to the fire, which I think is a very important thing. So that would be an important element, and we're certainly trying to think in Canada, you know, is there something we could do in 2023 to ensure that there's a quick follow-up to what will be a successful outcome at COP15.
And to the audience, I am pretty sure that you have already read the 10-point plan of Ecuador, Gabon, UK, and
Maldives.
It is a fantastic piece that can promote that level of collaboration in resource mobilization. So, we are planning to finish this at 1:45, so we have 15 minutes. It's okay, 1:45. So I do want to open oh wow, everybody. So please, could you give the mic?
Hello, my name is Pete Pearson. I work for WWF US. I'm curious, when we look at biodiversity loss, the number one driver is food and agriculture globally. How does Canada think about this in the context that as the planet warms, your environment becomes better for growing crops? And how do you look at the loss of grasslands and land conversion as a biodiversity loss, but having to trade that off with agricultural expansion?
That's actually a really, really good question. And I mean, we are trying to anticipate what the changes will be in light of climate impact. But I mean, for us, it can be a trade-off between nature and climate. And yes, obviously, changing temperatures could present, and you know, depending on which type of agriculture you're looking at in the IPCC report, they could be benefited in certain sectors in a country like Canada. But then you have more extreme weather events, and certainly in the prairies, we're seeing severe droughts, forest fires. So it's not that clear that we will benefit from what will be a longer growing season. Number one, but number two, we have to ensure that if we do become, you know, do we necessarily have to increase the amount of lands that we use for agriculture to be more performant from an agricultural perspective? And maybe one of the things we're looking at, can we do more with what we're using and doing it in a more environmentally friendly way, looking at our pesticides use, for example. So the Minister of Agriculture, Minister of Health and Environment and Climate Change are looking at our pesticide management regulations right now. But it is a good question. But one of the things we're also doing, you know, is those nature agreements with provinces to ensure that we're working with them to conserve at least 25 by 25 and 30 by 30, and we will continue going beyond that. I don't want us to increase our agricultural production at the expense of nature conservation in Canada.
There's some in the back. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Bethan. I'm from the Zoological Society of London. We're a conservation and biodiversity organisation that works worldwide. I'm curious, I just wanted to zoom in a little bit more on the interlinkages between the CBD and the UNFCCC, which we're obviously seeing happening in real time at the moment. But in things like, it's sort of a question in two parts. The first is that for countries' NDCs, a lot of countries are integrating biodiversity into their NDCs, but there isn't much link up between that and the CBD reporting mechanisms that we're currently seeing in the draft framework. So I was wondering if you could maybe get your thoughts on that. And secondly, regarding Article 6 and the financial mechanisms towards biodiversity protection and restoration, the economic sort of emphasis seems to be on restoration over management and protection of existing areas, meaning that we're seeing the deforestation of perfectly lovely land to then be planted with new trees because you get extra carbon credits for that, which obviously is not going to work in the long term for the long-term protection of biodiversity. And there seems to be a big divide there between what makes sense and what we're seeing in the economic markets. And in the context of the CBD, I wondered if you had any thoughts on those two things. Thank you.
Yeah, on the linkages between CBD, NDCs, and UNFCCC or the climate COP. Yeah, that's a good point. And frankly, I mean, there are a lot of issues we're trying to work through on the text on COP15. A couple of weeks ago, there was 1,800 brackets in the text. We're down to 1,200, so that's progress. In the ministerial meeting we had yesterday, we collectively agreed that we would instruct our negotiators between now and there's an open-ended group between the December 4th and 6th, I believe you'll be there. Okay, so we've instructed our negotiators to show more flexibility, and so that when the meeting starts on the 7th, we're down in terms of the number of brackets. So I don't know if we will be able to tackle this issue in Montreal. I'm not saying we won't, but I'm saying there's a lot of work we're trying to get done before. But it is clearly something that if we don't find a way to address in Montreal, that we need to address in the very short term. In terms of your second point, I mean, clearly we need good rules under Article 6 that won't incentivize deforestation of old-growth forests, and that's, I mean, certainly something as a Canadian, and where we still have lots. Some would say, we need to do a better job at protecting it, and I agree. And we're through our nature agreement, we are putting a very laser sharp focus on old growth forests in provinces or territories where there's still large intact forests. So it is an important issue. I'm not exactly up to speed on Article 6 negotiations, but I will talk to our negotiator. If that is an issue there, Canada will oppose it.
And let me add something to the first part of the question, that it is true, probably from now to Montreal it will be very difficult to address some concrete ideal things, as for example to integrate in some time NDCs with MBSAPs. How can we connect both mechanisms with long-term strategies? But if we are clear and if we get a good GBF, I hope that would be the next step. No, something that, look, I used to be minister for 5 years, and you cannot have different instruments for different conventions to be presented in different times, because that is not efficient. And the point it is now to promote and to bring convergence into the Rio Convention. One more question here in the back.
Thank you. Ed King from the European Climate Foundation. There seems to be a bit of confusion about the CBD and whether leaders have been invited and whether leaders will attend. Clearly, having leaders there will send a stronger political signal in what is already, we know, a really difficult year. Can you give any assurances that invitations have been sent out And is there any clarity on what leaders you know will be attending?
Unfortunately, I can't give assurances, not because we haven't tried. As you know, we've had 4 months to organize this COP. We didn't have a year or even 2. There was so many things we needed to do quickly, from a logistical point of view, but also politically, that by the time we got to talk and think and about a leaders summit, it was really, really late in the game. So we tested the appetite for it with many different parties and delegations around the world, and it was complicated. The response wasn't great. I don't think because people didn't want to come, but because it was so late in the process. Had we started working on that a year ago, we would be in a very different context. We're trying to see if there isn't ways to get leaders who would want to participate one way or another. So I'm not totally excluding it, but the idea of a summit like we saw here or in Glasgow, unfortunately, and it is really due to the short amount of time we had to prepare, won't be possible.
Yeah. And in relation to your question, it is true, it would be great to have leaders coming to Montreal. That would give a good political signal. But more than leaders, different actors. You know that I came to here, to Sharm el-Sheikh in 2018, and the level of participation in COP14, it was really poor. And then we are complaining. So I am wondering, how can we complain if we are not supporting the process, we are not helping the process to be strengthened? So my encouragement, it is come to Montreal, help the process. It is the only way, because we got this convention 30 years ago, and we have to strengthen the convention. I remember as a Peruvian in 92, I went to Rio 92. I'm old guy. So Peru produced a report to present during 92 summit, and it was a 20-page report. And for Peru, 18 pages, it was about the incoming CBD. And 2 pages about the climate change, because we thought, this is something from the north. They have them solving that problem. And look now how we are, in the opposite. In the opposite. So we bet a lot for the Biodiversity Convention, and it is not giving, not to us, to the people, to the nature, the benefit that we thought it would bring. So let's go to Montreal to strengthen that convention. So it is perfect to give you the last 3 minutes to invite people to come to Montreal, to encourage parties to take decisions, to say to the people that we have not only to address nature laws, but to take political decisions that can help us to be more effective in that big challenge.
Well, thank you, Manuel. I think I said earlier, I am very optimistic in nature, but I'm particularly optimistic about the COP. From everything I've seen over the last just the last 6 months, or since we've been, we officially said yes 4 months ago, but the discussion started a bit earlier about Montreal hosting. The High Ambition Coalition, this group of dedicated countries working together to ensure that we have a good outcome. The Chinese presidency is becoming more and more involved. There's really good collaboration with Canada as host country, with the CBD Secretariat, the involvement of civil society, of philanthropies, the private sector. I think we can do that. In terms of number of participation, it's going to be a very large CBD COP. I don't know if it's going to be the largest, but it's going to be very large. We're going to have very good ministerial participation as well for the high-level segment. So I'm confident that all of the ingredients are there so that we have a very successful outcome in Montreal, but we'll need your help. Us, government, and we can't do that on our own. So please, see you in Montreal in a couple of weeks, and if you need good names of brands for parkas or things like that, just let me know.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And before of closing and give back the floor to you, it is true, Canada has just taken 4 months in moving this forward with a lot of gravity and courage, no? And that is something that we have to recognize. So thank you very much, Stephen, to your team. Thank you, Tara, Who else is here of your team? Okay, many of your team. A lot of people. Thank you for all your willingness in pushing Harvey, sorry, I am forgetting Harvey in front of me, for helping the world to move towards a strong decision. So now you have back the floor.
Thank you, Minister Guibault, Manuel, for this excellent discussion. We're fortunate to be able to continue to draw on your insights and leadership as we confront the daunting challenges ahead of us. See you both in Montreal.